Hello to all my clay friends. So today we are going to make a vase out of a 3-pound ball of clay, and we're going to make this a vase or a bottle form. So we're going to start by throwing we'll start with the 3-pound ball. We're going to make it into the tallest cylinder that we can, and then I'm going to talk to you about how I shape it and get the cylinder, make the body, and then how to make the collar in, how to collar in the neck to make this so narrow, and then actually put that flare back in. So we're going to cover a lot of different things, as well as talk about what the aesthetic choices I'm making, like how I divide up the form and push parts out, push things in, just to make the form look good, right? And let's do it. All right, so we start with our 3-pound ball of clay, and we're just gonna slap her down onto the wheel head right here. So we slap her down. Let's do this side, because this is the side I smoothed out. I have a little bit of a seam here, but that doesn't matter because that will get smoothed out once we start throwing. So I'm gonna try to make sure it's in the middle to begin with, so it's a little bit off, you see that? So I'm just gonna take that and kind of try to shove it over some like that. Let's see if that's a little better, right? So it's still sticking out a little bit right there, so we'll shove it just a little bit more that way. That's pretty good, a little bit better than before. So I'm just doing a little bit of like what I would call pre-centering. So now we'll get into the action here, and I'll just get really, and then just try to center this guy up as best I can, right? So that's raise number 1. Now I could raise it one more time before I head down, so I'll do one more raise here. Raise number 2. There, so that's looking pretty good. We'll go back down now. Push, 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 push. All right, so remember this is a 3-pound ball of clay, and the whole time I'm centering, I'm trying to always keep in mind that I want to make this into a pretty high cylinder, right? A pretty tall one that that's kind of narrow, because if I let this blob get too wide, right? If I let this get too wide, the cylinder will end up being shorter because it just takes so much clay to go around. So I'm going to try to keep this pretty narrow as I throw, right? I'm not going to let it spread out into a wide cylinder, okay? Because I need it to be fairly narrow. And for me, it's just easier if I start fairly about the same size that I want my cylinder in the end here, then it's just less work for me as I go. Okay. So I think I got it. That seems pretty well centered. Let's see. You know, we can go up and down one more time just for kicks. Right, so normally I probably just go, but this time for you guys, we'll just go up and down one more time. There we go. Look at that. Oh, that's just a little bit better, so I'm glad I did that. There we go. So now I'm going to flatten out the top just a little bit like that. There. So that preps me for my opening, right? So now I'm ready for my opening. So here, so this is about the width of the cylinder that I want to make. So I've already made that, so that's looking really good, right? And so now I'm going to bring the camera in just a little bit closer so you can watch me do my opening. So here, right? So I'm going to go here and just start pushing down here just a little bit off center. Right, as I go down, let's center that up into the middle. There we go. So here I'm going to wet it down just a little bit, and I'm just going to push down into the middle, right? So you can see here that I'm just pushing my fingers down like that as I sunk in. I'm using a very constant and even pressure, right? So I touch the clay. The clay is always moving before I touch it. I touch, and then I start adding pressure, and then I apply more pressure and more pressure until I start getting the movement that I want, where I'm starting to go down, right? So you see that? I'm down, 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 down. I'll let off, and I'll release. And so let's check the depth just to see how deep we are and make sure we're at the right depth. I can already tell it's going to be too thick, but let's test it out and see. Right, so there, that is just too much depth. You see that right there? I am too thick, so I need to go down about a little bit that length of that part that's still of the needle tool that's exposed. So I'll go down just about that much more. Let's see, and let's just check one more time just to see here again. Push all the way down the bat. So, oh, I didn't really go down that much. So let's be a little bit more aggressive in our push down there, and then let's see how that looks. So that's looking about right. So that's about the thickness that I want right there. Width of my pinky, and that's just like overall, that's like my default how far I go down for most things, and because it allows me to trim the foot on there that I want. If I want a bigger foot, I'll leave it thicker. If I'm not going to actually trim any foot on, if I'm just going to leave it as a flat bottom, I actually go down even a little bit thinner than that. So now I'll curl my hands over like this, my right hand, and I'm going to pull straight back toward myself. So here, we'll back this off so you can see it a little bit better. So I curl this over like that, and I'll pull straight back like this. Down here, I'm gonna pull straight back. So you can hear my bat like rattling around because I didn't actually put the wing nuts in the bottom of my bat pin. So I was kind of lazy today. So you hear that rattling. To me, that's okay. That doesn't bother me, but I know some of you will be wondering what's going on. So now I'll come back in here and I'll flatten out this bottom. I didn't do such a good job here of opening this, but now what I'm going to do is I'm going to flatten out all this clay because I want this to be a nice flat surface at the bottom. So I'm going to come back in here and just take my sponge here. So I want to take my 3 fingers like this and make sure that these 3 fingers are flat. So these fingers, my middle finger is a little bit longer. So you see I have to kind of cheat that middle finger up so that they form like this flat surface like that. And then I put my sponge in there and then I let the sponge go like that, and then they'll move these 3 fingers back and forth to help squash that, help make it flat. So my goal is to make sure that this bottom down here is nice and beautiful and flat and happy, because this will be the bottom. And this, when I make my cylinder, it's going to be really hard for me to see what I'm doing or be able to get down in there and really make this sort of correction. So I want to do this, make this flat now. Let's check the bottom thickness just to be sure one more time. We're at perfect thickness there. I'm very happy with that. All right, so this is looking pretty flat. If you want to do a little bit of compression right now, this is a pretty good time, because once again, when you get this tall cylinder and it's really tall, it's going to be hard to reach in here. So I can just do some compression right now if you want to. That works for me. Go ahead, right? And that now just tightens up that clay surface. So hopefully maybe not as much water gets in, absorbs in. It'll help prevent S cracking and all that. So I'm wetting the whole surface down, inside and out with my sponge. And now I'm gonna start raising. This is kind of where things start getting really important. So, so now what we're gonna do is on the outside, I am going to, let me get a little bit good angle here. So on the outside, I am going to squeeze from here, from the outside. And actually for this, I use my knuckle. So a lot of times I teach with fingers, right? But for when I need to move more clay like this, I will take this index finger on the outside and I'll curl it over and I scrunch it. And then there's kind of at this knuckle joint right here, there's a little kind of chunk of blobby skin that starts to squirt out. That's the part I push against right there with that hand. So if we want to look at the overhead camera right there, that's the part. And I'm going to use that part of my knuckle and actually use this thumb and wrap it tight like that. So you see that? So everything's wrapped tight. Squeeze. And this actually provides pressure against it to help make it more solid, right? And then I use this fatty part, and that's the part I push down in down here. And I'll push out regular with my hand down here at the base. I'll connect my hands together so they can act together, so they go squeeze, squeeze. And then I want to hold that same gap and go all the way up to the top of my cylinder. Okay, so here we go. I'll get into position, right? And I'll push. Now here at the bottom, it always feels like I'm pushing harder than it is when I get to the top. So here we go up, right there, right? So I always feel like I need to squeeze harder down here to make these walls even, right? And as I go up, I need to lessen the pressure because the clay up here seems to move a lot easier. So I did one raising pass. So let's evaluate how this looks, because I want evenness right now. Evenness of this short cylinder is more important than anything else. Thickness is fine, like as far as being thick right now is okay, but I want to make sure it's even. So let's take a good look on the inside, right? So you can see how that cylinder, right, is pretty even from top to bottom, right? The inside is pretty straight up and down, right? And then let's look at the outside. The outside is pretty straight up and down. So that's what I have right now. So I have an even cylinder, so I'm good. I am good to go for the next step. If it was thicker down here, which often happens, right, this next raise, I'd actually squeeze even a little harder down here to try to thin some of that clay out more and then let up more pressure when I get up here. So I would squeeze harder down here and let up pressure because I want to get it even now as soon as I can. So this rim, it looks a little higher here on the outside and lower. So I always will try to round it. One way you can round it is just bend your hands over like that and just kind of push down like that, right? Because I want to create a nice round rim, because sometimes if it's a little bit off round like that, it will cause problems later in your throwing. Also, you see how this right now is flaring out a little? I don't want that. I want it either straight up and down, my walls, or I want them going inward a little bit like that, like in from widest, and then it gets a little narrower as it gets up to the rim. So either straight up and down or go canting in a little bit. So I'm going to squash this in just a little bit. You see, and just that squashing in. So the squashing in is just like as if you're centering. You want to be like, and then squash in like that. There you go. So there, so you see I just squash it in, and actually squashing in is kind of cool because it actually makes it a little taller at this stage. So here I'm going to wet everything down, and then I'll raise again. So I use the same technique, finger and hand, fingers from the inside like that. And I anchor them together, right? And you can connect them all sorts of ways. I've seen people cross their fingers either way. Sometimes I jam it. I jam this part of my thumb up into this thing, however you want. Some people connect them together this way. This is a little weak, right? It's a little bit unstable. So I'd only do that if I really had a taller cylinder and I want to connect them. But you want to somehow link your hands together so that they can work together at like one tool, like together. So here we go. That's there, and then let's go. So here, I'm going to do this one more time like that. So you see today, I have my hand like that, and I'm pushing down on the top part of that hand like that. You see that? Like that. So here, that's what we're doing. And push. So I push, and I'm slowly going up. So right, I'm trying to create evenness. So right about here, I start letting up the pressure, and I let up a little bit of pressure. I'm not pushing that hard here, right? Because it doesn't take much pressure, and you see how I was able to get that cylinder much taller, and you can see from this top-down camera, it's pretty even all the way up and down. But let's do a check. Let's do another way we can check evenness, right? So let's bring this in closer to the side. So now we're looking at the side of the piece here. So I'm going to take my needle tool here, and I'm just going to stab it through here at the top. So I'm going to stab it in and wait till it comes out the other side. Ooh, we don't want to do it there because it's a little bit, so we'll stab it through right there, right? So you see how it's coming through, and then I'm just going to take my finger and push it out. So now that needle tool, the tip of the needle tool is even with the surface, right? And then I'll pull it out and I can check my thickness, okay? And then what I'll do is I'll try to hold that thickness, like at that thickness, and I'll see if when I stab it through in the wall a little bit lower, let's see what happens. So about halfway mark, let's stab it through. So you can just see it's just starting to come out. You see that? Let's do it a little bit in another place. So you can just see, so it's just starting to poke out. So it's about the right thickness, right? If I want to check it, I can poke it all the way through, and then I can just push it back again to that surface and then pull it out. And then see, it's about the same thickness. And then let's do it way down here at the bottom. I'll just push it all the way through and then push it back again. Right, and if you're going to do that now, and then it's about that thickness. So that's a way you can check. And as your cylinder gets taller, you might have to do it several times. So this is just a check. Now, this will cause some issues with your cylinder later, but this early in the process, this will not cause a problem because when I throw it the next time, it will cover up all those marks, okay? And those marks won't show up in the end. But if I do it at the end, after I finish my final raise, and definitely those marks will show up. So you can do it now, just to kind of as an exercise. So here, I'm going to do this. I'm going to weight it down. So let's look at the thickness. So this is the thickness right here, right? If I make this half as thin, it's at least going to get twice as tall. So that's good, right? And so I feel like I'm on track to get the height that I want out of this piece of clay. It's also pretty straight up and down. So I could also collapse this in just a little bit if I want to. So I could have a tapering cylinder, I like to call it, where the cylinder is in a little bit. There we go. So that makes me happy. I'm going to wet the inside down like that. Just use my whole sponge. And now we're going to raise again. So now I'm going to switch to my fingers because I like using my fingertips for this. As it gets thinner, I don't need as much power. And I want a little bit more control. So I'll use my fingertips when I'm doing this one. Okay. So here we go. And I'm also going to push in a little bit right here. Right, I'm just going to take some time and kind of push that part in like that. So what did that do? That allows me to undercut a little bit, and then my whole cylinder now will get a little bit narrower during this raise. And that'll allow me to make a taller cylinder in the end. Here we go. So I'm pushing, and I'm raising up, right? Looking good. Trying to use a steady pressure as I go up. You see that? Ooh, this is looking pretty good. Pretty hot. So here I really let up the pressure. Really let up the pressure. Or I'm not pushing that hard when I get up here because that for me, it feels like I'm not pushing hardly at all. So let's look at what I just did. That's looking really good, meaning as far as it's a really straight cylinder, it looks like it has a lot of strength left. It looks like I can get at least one more raising pass out of this. So usually you get about 3 raises on a piece of clay after you open and start raising. So I think I can squeeze one more out of this, so we will try, right? So we're just straightening it out a little bit because it was just a little bit flared out. So let's say it does have a little dent. Go through and just straighten it out. So you see how there's just a little bit of bulge here. I'm just going to push that back in like that really quick. There we go. So now I'm going to wet the whole thing down. We'll do one more raise because I think I can get it just a little bit taller. Let's do that. So I'm wetting the whole inside down. I'm wetting the whole outside. It was already wet, but I'm doing it again anyways. And let's do one more raise. So I'm going to get really close to the wheel. And what I do for this is sometimes you got to hold really steady all the way up. As it gets thinner like this, it's okay that you probably don't need to use as much force squeezing, but you need to really focus on keeping a consistent, being really consistent as you go up, because you want that cylinder even from top to bottom. So let's do a quick look on the inside, right? It looks pretty even from top to bottom. That inside does not look like it's getting thicker toward the bottom, and that's definitely what I want out of this. I definitely don't want this to get thicker, right, as I get down, as it goes down. So here we go. So the cylinder looks pretty wet, so I don't think I'll have to, well, I guess we'll re-wet it. There we go. Now I'm going to raise up again. So I'm going to push here again and then push out a little bit from the inside. So this one's too big, right? I can't link my fingers together. You see how? Because I can't reach that because this is getting dangerously close. So I'm going to raise, but as soon as I can, I'm going to link my hands together and then continue on. So you'll see that happen. There we go. Pushing in a little bit right here. I'm going to re-wet that down because it got dry because I was pushing in so hard. Now we go up. Here we go, going up in the air. I want to hold super steady all the way up. Hold super steady all the way up. Hold super steady all the way up. Right, so this is my last real good raise I'll get out of this. So I'm actually pushing, I'm trying to get as much mileage out of this piece of clay right now as I can. So I'm being more aggressive, right, to get this clay to really squirt up into the air. And I'm feeling really good about that raise. That felt really good. So there, and then let's just look at it really fast before we do any changes. So I was being a little bit more aggressive, right? Trying to get as much mileage out of this piece of clay as I can. Let's just do a quick look at how it looks on the inside. So that's looking really good, right? You see how it may get a little thicker down there, but you see how it's not an issue, right? It doesn't have a really big wall thickness change. Like down there, it looks like a pretty flat bottom, right? And then the wall, because what we want is the wall to come into the bottom, hopefully at like a 90-degree angle like this. So there's a bottom, and then the wall kind of comes straight in like that. That's what we want, hopefully, and then it's about the same thickness. Now, if I cut this cylinder in half, it probably gets a little thicker as you get down, and that's just natural, right? To get it 100% even is pretty difficult. But in the end, what we want is just how to make a good pot. And having a little bit of extra thickness down there, you can still make really good forms like that. So don't worry. Like lots of people's pots are a little bit thicker wall thickness down here. So now I have my cylinder. First of all, I kind of start from the bottom and clean up the bottom first, because I have all this water. Oops, I have all this water kind of parked in there, right? You see that? There's all that water that I've been squeezing out. So you notice that I'm not too careful about the water. I'm willing to put whatever amount of water I need in there to make this work. So I'm going to dip my sponge in the water, wring it out so it's kind of clean, and then just go in there and try to mop out that water as best I can. Right? And I'm not really trying to smooth out the bottom, right? I've already done my compression. I'm just trying to get in there and just get out the water. And I might do a little bit of smoothing, but my bottom, remember, is already smooth from before, right? So you see that it'd be very difficult for me to get a rib in there and try to smooth it out. So you can see also that I've put a little flare in that from going in there with my wrist. I'm going to straighten that flare out a little because I don't want that flare there yet. And then I'm going to take 2 ribs like this, and from either side, I'm going to do a scrape along from the bottom and try to scrape off inside and outside all the slip. So I got the bottom clean. Now I'm going to clean out the inside outside. I'm going to switch because this, I can hold on to this bigger rib on the inside a little bit better. I'll use the round side on the outside. So I'm using double rounded sides here. And so what is this doing? This is scraping off all the excess slip and helping to smooth out those throwing lines. Because for me, I'm not a big fan of throwing lines, but you see all the excess slip. So all that excess slip comes off, and I'll make sure that that goes on to my side of my bucket, and that will eventually go into recycling. I want that into my clay recycling bucket, but for right now, it goes on to the side of my water bucket. And then here we go. Going up again. There we go. So you see more slip, and I might do it. So those first 2 times are generally just to scrape the slip off. Now I'm going to try to smooth out all those lines, because you can see the rib. There's still some slip on there, but the throwing lines are gone. So now I'm going to switch over. I'm still going to use round side of the inside, but I'm going to use flat side on the outside, and instead of going straight up and down when I'm scraping, I'm going to turn the rib like that. And so if you notice that when the rib is touching a little bit like that, it only touches in the middle of the flat part. It doesn't touch the sides, and that makes a slightly better scrape. So, you know, also I'm going to switch ribs. I'm going to put this bigger guy on the outside and make sure it's turned at an angle as I go up. And then I just want this part of the cylinder, I just want the middle part of this to be touching the cylinder. The one on the inside, just kind of leave flat, I think. Let me switch to a bigger one for the inside, too. Let's see here. We could use this guy. So I'm going to use this big boy on the inside here for that one, just because that's what I got lying here. So here we go. Starting way at the bottom. And so this time I'm really concentrating. I'm not necessarily trying to concentrate on scraping slip off. I'm really trying to concentrate on making the sucker smooth this time. There we go. So you see how I'm able to really get that cylinder looking pretty good, right? There we go. And I relax. I'm not pressing very hard when I do this, right? And I scrape all that stuff off. I'll do it one more time. I'm not that concerned about this line down here either, because that's getting into the region where I'm going to end up trimming it off anyways. So I'm not that concerned about that. Do one more time, and then I think that would be good for the smoothing out, for the ribbing. All right, so that's good. Right, so that's looking really groovy. So now I have what I call a blank. So now I can think about shaping this into something. So let's get out this guy here. So this is my example bottle here, right? So if you look at this bottle, right, I definitely, probably this cylinder here is a little shorter than this example bottle right here, right? So when this gets stretched out, this is going to end up sinking down a little. So this bottle, I just did a little bit better trimming job. But if you look at it, we have to think about, how do we go from this to this? Well, part of it is just learning where to put the elements, right? So if you want something like this, there's basically a couple different things, right? The parts that are really important that I see is wide point here, right? And that will, and then, so let's get something to transfer marks over. Let me see here if I can find my needle tool. So here's my needle tool here. So when I break this cylinder up, right, and decide into these components, right, what's happening here? There's a wide point somewhere here, right? So what we're going to do is I'm just going to draw a line to there on my cylinder. So that will be close to the widest point. My shoulder right here, this will be my shoulder for my thing, be right about there, right? And then my neck will be somewhere up here, right? And that's the major parts that I need to keep track of. So why do I even need to keep track of those, right? This will be the widest point of the whole thing. And if I move that widest point higher or below or that mark, I won't have, for me on this piece, it's kind of important that for the body of the pot, which is basically between here and here, that I have kind of a symmetrical body on this pot that kind of comes out and then comes to a wad, and it still goes back in about the same way. So I need to plan that out here in about the same way here too, right? Body wide, and I have a shoulder, and then it comes in for the neck. So that's about how I need to break this cylinder up when I try to take this cylinder and try to make it into this. This will always be about where the widest point is going to be. This is where the shoulder will be. This is around where the neck will be, right? And so that's how I plan it out in my brain. And then when we start stretching this, you'll see you'll see that happening. So here, I actually don't want those lines right on there. So I'm going to erase them very quickly like that, I hope. Sometimes I'm not able to, so normally, of course, right, I would not put those lines on there. I would just leave it blank there. But we do that to show you where it's going to be. All right, so when I do this now, this around here needs to be the widest point, and then this up, somewhere up here is going to be the neck, right, where the neck starts. So that is my distance for pushing this out. So I'm going to push this out like that. So here we go. I hold this rib like that. So it's kind of like with these ribs, I hold it with the flat, the chubbier curve down, the narrower curve up, and I hold it like this, and I'm using that curve like that as I push it out. So here, we're going to start pushing out here, right around here, and I'll try to show you where it is by following it down with my finger. Right, and so this is called stretching. So for the body of the pot, I never really get to touch the outside of this part again, right? So you see there? So now I started and I have to do it again. So I always start from the top going down, right? So you can see some clay came off, so we'll scrape that clay off and we'll go again. Push somewhere up here, I'll push out, right? And I just go down. There we go. And then so here what we want to do is I go all the way down till I feel this guy drag against the bottom, okay? Or get close to the bottom. So here it's looking pretty good, right? And so you can see that those lines opened up because usually, right, and we would not put those lines on. I'm going to try to cover them up, I guess. We'll see what happens, right? So now I'm going to push a little bit more, but you see what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to establish that wide point as the widest point now. And what I want to do is make this a skinny version of what it's going to be later, right? So I'm just going to feed it junk food until it gets bigger, right? So I'm putting it on its I gotta gain weight diet. So every time I push it out, right, it's gotten a little bit bigger, right? So you see that? So now I finally got it where the wide point of the pot is already there. That's about where I want the widest point of the pot to be later. And now I'm going to keep pushing it out, boom, 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 and then it'll get to the point where it is, where the form looks right, right? So this whole section develops all together all at the same time. And when it gets there, and everything should be almost, the form should be pretty close to what you want, at least from about here down, okay? So here we'll do it again, we'll push out. So now this curve is getting pretty broad. So what I'm starting to do is I'm going to rotate this rib and use this tighter curve here now to push this out. I could switch to a smaller rib and I'll do that in a second, but I just want to use this rib one more time and I'm pushing, 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 pushing. And you see I'm making this the widest point and then I'm relaxing my pushing when I get down to here, right? Because I'm trying to do that. There we go. So you see that starting to happen. Now, this part here, right, as I push this out, this little blob of clay starts interfering with me pushing out this curve, right? Because this is going to resist me pushing that bottom out so that the curve has a nice shape. So I'm going to undercut that a little bit. So here, I'm not going to undercut it super dramatic. I'm just going to undercut it a little bit, right? Just to follow that, the curve that I have already, right? There we go. So I'm undercutting that to make it look okay. And then I'm going to cut that piece of clay off. Woohoo! Clay gone. Right? Now I'm ready to, let's get that off. So now I'm ready to keep going. And now that part of that clay won't fight me as much when I'm trying to push this bottom part out. All right, so I'm going to switch to a smaller rib right here because this rib now I can still keep pushing because this has a slightly tighter curve, right? So I'm going to keep pushing it out. Remember, I'm going to try to keep this part as the widest part right here. There we go. So here we'll just be more aggressive this time. There we go. We're doing it kind of slow before. And you see that now I'm more confident when I get down there. I'm able to continue that push all the way down because now this part of the clay will lean out more. And this is still thicker down here, so I know I still got to do some trimming down here. All right, so that's looking pretty good, but I think it still looks a little too skinny, so I'm going to keep pushing it out. So here we go. Push, push, push. There we go. Look at that. So I'm being a little bit more aggressive, right? As I push down, I'm going down. So now you can see maybe I pushed out just a little bit too much. So you see it's just a little bit more weighty down here. So when I do this next one, I'm really going to try to push this top part out some. So here, I'm gonna hold it this way this time. So when I reach under, I can kind of push out and up right here. There we go. So here I'm pushing up and I'm pushing this part out this way. Then I'll start going down. There we go. So there, it's starting to get to the shape I like. So you see, each time I push out, it goes boom, 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 boom. So that means that I can stop at any time. So if I like that shape, woohoo, I could be done with this part right now. Let's just push it out just a little bit more because I want to just have a little bit more like inflation, like that, inflation. So here we go. So I'm going to push this part out just a little bit more, just so it has a little bit more dynamic energy. And so that will create a bigger contrast to when I color this in. So this will seem wider and the width of this will be in more contrast of this as I bring this in. So here we go. One more time. You notice that I don't really touch the outside. I don't use any more water, right? So that's looking pretty good. And then you can see that the texture really, you see those little scratch marks that really get big, right? Because that I put in to show you where I want the wide parts. So any sort of texture that you have on here before you stretch will really get emphasized. I can come back and cover that up when it's leather hard, but now you see that's where I wanted my widest point, and that's about right. You see how my widest point is about there? I wanted something that's pretty symmetrical, that comes up and back in, that has some symmetry. Okay, so as far as pushing this part out, we're done. Next step is how do we get this smaller, right? So how do we go from this to something like this where it's collared in, and then how do we develop that shoulder? Let's do it. Okay, so this requires a new technique that until you do bottles that you don't really know, right? So what you want to do is, the technique is to make like two L's or one backwards L, right, with your other hand. And then what you want to do is you want to bend your index finger down. So you see you have thumb, index finger, and ring finger like that, and you have that going on both sides. And then what I'm going to do is I push in on those 6 points, and that's how I collar it in. So I'm going to put this camera a little bit on a different view so you guys could see it too from that side. Come on, it's hard to, so this is all reversey for me. So all right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to do that, but I also need to wet this down before I do that because this is dried out, right? Remember, we haven't used water on this for a while. I need to add water to just this part. Try to keep the water off this part here. Okay, so I'm just going to add water to that, and I'm just going to take my sponge and just wet this part, outside part down. So it doesn't need much water, it just needs to be slippery. Okay, like that. Just needs to be slippery, 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 like there. And so you see I didn't drip down below there, if you can. And then I want to make sure that both of these hands are wet, especially these 6 points. Especially these 6 points. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You need to make sure all those are really wet. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to push in like this and go up. Okay, I start at the part where I want to squish in, and I squish in and I go up. Now I can already tell that I took too long in my explanation and that dried out a little bit. And so I'm gonna do it again. So here, wet this whole thing down. Try to keep water from dripping down the rest of the pot, right? And then I'm gonna make sure my fingers are nice and wet. I'll do it again. So I'll be a little bit more aggressive. Oh, because it's nice and slimy. And then see how I'm able to bring it up and make it narrower. Ooh, look at that. So I was able to get a dramatic change right in my thing. I got it way down. I got it much tighter. Problem is we can't keep doing that because as this clay gets, the diameter of this gets smaller and smaller, the clay gets thicker and thicker and thicker, right? And so what's going to happen eventually is that the clay is going to end up too thick, and then you just can't keep doing this because then the clay starts resisting the contraction too much. So then what you got to do is do a little like micro raise, like you just stick your hand in here and you reach down as far as you can, and then with one fingertip on both sides, you'll throw this neck a little thinner and you'll get a little taller. So that's the good thing, is if this neck was looking a little short before, or even looks short right now, I have to thin this out to keep contracting it in. So I'm going to throw this a little taller. right now. So I'm gonna wet the outside, but I also need to wet the inside now because I'm gonna touch the inside. So here we go. Go down all the way, just to the parts that I know I want to touch, right, to throw. Then I'm just going to use this finger, my middle finger on both sides, and have it like this and push like a little micro raise. Now this is getting small, right, fairly narrow, and I want to have a really good wheel speed, like a little bit faster than normal. I don't want to go full speed yet, but at the end, as this gets narrower and narrower, you want to increase your wheel speed. So here I'm going to push in, kind of dramatically, push, 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 and now I'm putting backward pressure, and now I'm trying to raise this up. So has to be super slimy to do this. Ooh, look at how much height we got. That was really fun. All right, that is looking really good. So you see that I'm able to get a lot more height out of that. So it was okay that this looked a little stubby before, because I'm able to, as I bring this in, right, I'm able to get more height as I raise it. Now, some of you may be thinking I can now collar this back in using my 3-6 point technique again. Some of you think, well, why couldn't you just take your hands and smash it in just like centering? The problem is that this is, if you use your whole hand surface and try to do that, that has too much friction and you'll tear this part off, because this part is really weak because there's this part here and it's connected to this part here, which is curving in. You'll put too much friction on your pot and the pot will just collapse. So it's all about friction management, right? And you notice that we're just only touching the pots in only a few places and using that little place and squeezing it in. And when we're doing the raising, I'm just using 2 fingertips, right, to do my raising. So here now, since I thinned it out, I could do another collaring in. So I'll wet this down again like that. And I want to do this kind of evenly and just go squeeze, squeeze, and go up. Here we go. Squeeze, squeeze, and go up. Ooh, that's looking really good. I'm very excited. So I didn't squeeze that aggressively because I wanted to show you this view. So I purposely only squeezed a little bit. So this time I'll squeeze again. So I'm going to wet this down again, right? If I wasn't talking so much, I would have just jumped right in. So here, I'll squeeze, squeeze. So now I have to think about this. How do I want this to go in? So right now, you'll see how this is kind of folding into itself. So I kind of like that. So when I push here, I'm going to try to continue this curve right here. So I know about how much pressure hopefully that I can do. I'm going to wet it down again because it dries pretty fast. And as you notice that this has gotten lots narrower, so I'm going to make sure my things. So I'm going to increase my wheel speed when I do this squeezy, squeezy. You see how much faster my wheel's going? Whoa, Nelly. Right, so now I have a choice. Is this getting too narrow? Is it narrow enough, right? What do I want to do with it? So this, for me, is looking pretty good. Like, I'm pretty excited about this right now. So let's get this camera in a place where that we can manage it so we could see the whole bottle, right? So this is definitely a bottle. A few minutes ago, it was a vase, right? So what is the difference between a bottle and a vase, right? A vase for me is when this gets narrower, if this, the widest point, and this is a very loose definition because this wouldn't apply to everything, right? Where the widest point of the vase and the narrowest point of the neck is less than 1/3, right? The narrowest point of the neck is less than 1/3 of the overall distance. Now that's a very loose definition, but just when you look at it, right, this is definitely kind of getting into bottle territory, right? Where it was before, it was a vase, and I could have stopped at any time, but bottles are kind of more fun to make. So here we go. So now I have to think about, do I want to make this more narrow? Well, once it gets this narrow, it's hard to make more narrow. Like, the narrower it is, the harder it is to manage, right? But let's try it one more time to do one more raise and one more narrowing. So here, let's get a throwing stick out, because you notice that I can't get my hand really in that far, right? So what I can do is, if I have a throwing stick, so let's hold this in the image for a second. A friend of mine made this. He was a woodworker, right? But basically, this is just a piece of flat wood that he cut out this shape in. So look at that shape. the shape works really good for this, right? There are also ones that you can buy, and I don't remember where we got this from. This is a Mud Tools tool. You could use one of these, or they have the smaller one, which I was just using earlier today, but now is lost. But they have a smaller version of this big boy, which you can use, and has a little black ball in the end. So anything that you can get in there, sometimes I just use a stick, right? And so what this is going to do is be my finger on the, act like my finger on the inside of the pot. So let's get a close-up shot of it, how this works. So here, I'm going to put this on the inside, and I'm going to push back, and that's going to be my finger. So how do I know where it is? It's just experience. So I think I forgot to wet the outside. So I have to wet this outside like that, right, to make sure my finger is all slickery. I have to make sure the wood is wet. Now, wood is really good because once it's wet, it's really slick on ceramic. So I'm holding my tool like this. Let's back that off a little bit. So here, I'm holding my tool like that, and that's going to be like my finger on the inside. The problem is this takes some practice, meaning that I don't actually feel where this is. I got to know where it is. And once I feel it, I mean, I can't really feel it from the inside. I have to feel it from the outside. And I'll push, and I'll go up just like normal. Okay, just as if it were a finger. So I have to find where that place is, and here we go. I can go really fast for this. There we go. So that's about as tall as I'm willing to do right now, right? So that is looking pretty good, right? And so now it's all about finishing. How do I want this bottle to look, right? Is this too tall? Is it looking okay? This is seeming like it's okay. So now let's clean up some of the slip and stuff that's on the outside. I want to get a nice rubber rib, a flexible one, and I could just start cleaning some of this up, because I've been adding water to this consistently. So I want to just try to clean up some of this rib, some of this right here, right? And then let's see here. And then I'm going to clean up some of this rim here, up in here, like that. Right, so this is feeling pretty groovy about this, right? This neck is feeling pretty good. Now, is it going to be super successful like this when you do it your first one? I don't know, right? The first ones are always stressful and difficult. And you see that it takes a while to make this neck. Like, it doesn't go super fast, right? It takes a little bit of time. But also, time is a little bit of your enemy. Like, this clay only gets a certain amount of time for me to be throwing on it before it starts to twist up and go away. So this is going to take some practice. So now what am I going to do? So if I see it, it's looking pretty good. I'm pretty happy with the overall form. Let's see if we can back that off even farther so we get a good look at it like that. I'm pretty happy with the overall form of it. I'm thinking that it's looking pretty good, right? So let me do some adjustments here with let me adjust how it looks for the brightness, because it's, there we go. So there, I adjusted the brightness so you can see this area a little better. To me, this part is sticking out a little bit. You see how this part looks pushed down, this part is sticking up, and that has the rest of this curve. So what I can do here to help get rid of that kind of sticky heaviness and make sure that it's more even, right, the curve all the way around, is I can take one of these soft ribs and I can just push that back down. Okay, and I have to be careful because I don't get to push the form back out. I just hit it with my knuckle. You don't get to pick it up. You don't get to push the form when you have this long neck. I don't get a chance to push that back out, but I can push that form back in. Ooh, see how that's so much better already, right? Push this back down a little just to get it like that, and then here, I'm going to run this in over here like that. That's looking pretty good. And so here, let's talk about the different parts, right? So this is, foot would be down here. This is the body, and this is what I call the belly. This is the shoulder. This is where the neck starts, and this one has a really long neck going up. Woohoo! But this part, the part that I'm least happy about right now is how this is transitioning from shoulder to neck, because it looks a little bit ambiguous. I don't want that. I want this to be more like defined, like the curve to be more confident there. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take the heel into this because this already has a pretty close curve to what I want to do. And I'm just going to lightly push that in, and this will help clean that curve up. Ooh, even just that, you see, just a little bit like that, how that curve is starting to look so much better. So this part right here looks pretty good, but now this part I think could be just pushed down a little bit. So that's what we'll do. We'll push this part down a little. So I'm trying to push that part in. Oh, you see how that just already looks so much better. And actually I'm going to tighten it up. So I was using this side. This is a little bit bigger curve. I'm going to flip my rib around and use this tighter side here. I'm using the rubber rib so I don't like use too much force. The rib this rubber rib forces me to take it easy with the force. So here that I'm using. So here I'm pushing that down, 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 down. There. Ooh. So that to me, that curve now from here to here just looks more confident in the way how I like it, right? And you guys may have been happy the other way. So now I need to work on the neck because the neck definitely doesn't seem, this part of the neck seems okay, but definitely something needs to happen up here. But I'm going to do some very light cleanup on the neck. Right? So take your time on these. So you notice that sometimes I'm touching the opposite side because sometimes just the drag on having the rib here will rip your neck off. But sometimes if you very lightly put an opposite drag on your other side with the other hand, you may have seen me doing this, it helps keep everything nice and stable. I'm using very light pressure for this part. You cannot push lightly enough. There. So that neck is looking okay. So now the last little bit is finishing the rim and flaring it out a little, because I think I could leave it like this. So let's just finish the rim first. So let's get in close. So for this guy, we are going to trim it off by holding this. I'm going to cut from the outside. So I hold this guy like a pencil, right? My needle tool, I hold it like a pencil, and then I'm going to come in and cut it off. So let's go with that view. So here, let's go with that one. So here, I'm just going to come in, and you see that I balance this, I push this hand up against there. So holding it like this, and I push my hand up against this, so that creates stability. Right hand, left hand, thumb pushes down, right hand pushes up, and then I use this finger on the inside and ride along the inside like that. And then I slowly take this tool and score the surface, establish my level line, and then each time I go a little bit deeper into the clay, a little bit deeper into the clay. So I'm all the way through. Woo. So now I have a nice, even, flat rim, right? That now I can begin to decide what I'm going to do. So these next few things, you'll see that the pot is going to change a lot, and what you would use it for. Would you use it for flowers? Are you going to use it to hold wine? Things like that. The next few minutes are going to really change how this pot looks. So let's go over, let's get a view where we can see the overall form. Right, so this is kind of like good view because it's mostly at eye level, right? So right now, let me round the rim off first. Okay, and then let me chamois it, or let's use a piece of plastic. So this is just a piece of plastic that I keep around, and this is like my chamois substitute when I can't find my chamois. This is super delicate, so I have to take it easy. Even just chamoising it could really mess things up. Right, so I have to be super delicate in the amount of pressure I use, how I use the pressure, right? I have to be super gentle because all this is really weak up in here. So now I could leave it like this, and this could be like this kind of flower vasey thing, right? And that looks great. I'm very excited about that. There's a couple other things we could do with this. So what else could we do? Well, I could also, if I put a cork in this, right, it would definitely be then transform it into something more bodily, especially if I put a handle, whoop, right there, right? Then I'd have a handle, have a cork, whoop, put in there, and then that could be definitely like a storage kind of thing, like for wine or juice or something, right? So if you're going to put a cork in there, you probably want to flare because all those corks, right, have like a taper to it, and we want to match that taper. So let's just do that, right? So I'm just going to stick my fingers in a little bit here, right? And I'm going to taper this outward. Right, so once again, I got to be super gentle. So I'm going to wet my fingers down really good, and I'm just going to reach in there and just force this out just a little bit. So I'm letting time do it, right? I'm not forcing it out dramatically. And you can see now it just has a little taper on it, right? There we go. So you see how it just has that little taper, and then boop, a little cork could fit in there. So let's just see how that form looks. For me, just that little change of flaring out that the rim of this bottle just a little bit changes the whole energy of the pot, meaning before the widest point of the neck was here, and in general it's like a tapering neck as it comes in. Now I have flared it out, and so now this is the narrowest part, and it has this different energy, right, that is flaring out. So let's do a little bit more. So this is actually a good place to stop, but let's do a little bit more where we flare it out even a little bit more. So let me wet the rim, wet this down a little bit, and then let's just do it a little bit more, and we'll see how the pot continues to change as we flare this out. There we go. Right, so you see how that is a most definite flare, and you see that it creates that beautiful shadow, and then let's move the flare downward. So I'm going to push out down below the rim like that, and then push it out like that. There we go. Right, ooh, look at that. So that is definitely creating a different flavor. Ooh, I'm kind of grooving on that one, right? So it's definitely left like the cork stopper kind of mode, right, where you could stick a cork stopper in there, but now it has definitely changed it into something, I don't know, like it definitely has something more, like it's more like a vasey thing, right? You wouldn't use it to store something in there, but it's like a bottle vase thing, right? This would be great to put flowers in once again. All right, so that's looking pretty good, right? So what did we talk about, right? We made the tallest cylinder we can out of a 3-pound ball of clay. We formed it, right? We got to remember to form the bottom, right? And think about the shape that you want in the end, and think about where you want your widest spot, and then concentrate on making that wide part and making the bottom form, right? And stretching it out, and then you start collaring it in to make the neck. And at any point, I could have stopped and said it could have left the neck much wider, which is a little bit easier, but I wanted to show you how to make something that has a pretty long neck. All right, thanks for joining me.